Hey guys, and welcome to the in-depth recap of game number 4 of my best of 5 finals match against Nigel Peltier at this summer's Scrabble Players Championship. As you guys know from yesterday's video, Nigel won game 3. It was a very tactically challenging game. I think I made a couple of inaccuracies that may or may not have hurt my chances late in the game, but in any case, it was a tough loss, and I needed to rebound quickly as I would now have to defeat Nigel 2 games in a row to defend my title, which I knew was possible, but was definitely not going to be an easy task, so I would need to bring my A game. Nigel was first in this game, and fortunately for me, he did not have a good rack, A-B-I-I-N-P-U. He goes with Piani here for 20 points, which I think is reasonable. Another option is Nubia in the same spot, which does keep a better leave. IP is preferable to BU, but this gives up 4 points, and also puts the I next to the double underscore, which could give me some pretty big counterplay if I have a tile like the Q or the X. Piani is a bit safer. I think this makes a lot of sense. I do indeed have the X as well as the blank, so a pretty good opening draw for me. I go with Vox for 30. Another option I considered was Fox, overlapping the A, the N, and the I, which scores 1 more point, but it keeps the V, which is a lot more unwieldy than the F, so I figured I would do this. This also keeps the board a little bit more open, which I don't mind at this point since I have the blank, and I'd like to try to be the one who gets the first bingo down, so I think Vox was a reasonable call on my part here. Nigel draws a second U and really doesn't have a whole lot of good plays. He makes a very smart decision here, just blowing up his rack completely with unbuilt for 14. There's no reason to try to play shorter here and play something like Ulu. It is a little bit more defensive, but the B is a little bit awkward. This is not a great leave. He's just kind of conceding to being in a worse position. I like this play. It's a little more aggressive, reaches deeper into the bag for one of the blanks or the S's. This is certainly what I would have done in this position. I feel like I should have a bingo here. I spent a decent amount of time, especially now looking through the U and the I that Nigel's play of unbuilt just opened. But there is indeed no bingo, as I convinced myself after thinking for a couple of minutes. Ended up playing Fix It for 30, which looks like the clear best play. It scores way more than anything else, and as long as I can draw 1 or especially 2 vowels to my MNR blank leave, I should be in great shape to bingo on my next turn. Nigel draws 3 E's, and while this isn't a terrible rack, he really doesn't have a whole lot of good options. He goes with MA for 17 points, which looks pretty solid. Another option you could consider is Legman for 20, which does get rid of some more tiles, but ES is a very strong leave. Of course, EG and S is pretty solid too, and I think the fact that he's got the I in unbuilt to potentially work with for ING bingos maybe tips the scales in favor of EME. On a board where you didn't have an I to play through, the NG combo is not actually that strong, so I might have gone with Legman, but given he's got that I to play through, I think this play is very reasonable. I draw very well, and I have a whole bunch of 86-point bingos available through the I decide to play Ceramans, which seems as good as anything else. There's not a huge reason to think for a long time here, and I ultimately decided that the difference between some of my bingos was going to be small enough that it wasn't really worth spending a whole lot of time trying to optimize my play here. It's possible that Seminary is a little bit better just because it ends in a Y instead of an S, so it doesn't give Nigel an S to bingo through at the end of the word, so maybe a very slight inaccuracy, but I played this pretty quickly and I was happy to save some time for the possibly more challenging and important later stages of the game. Nigel draws the K, and that prevents him from bingoing here. He plays Oak, which I think makes a lot of sense. He's down almost 100 points, so he's got to create some more space on the board, and the top left part of the board, as it often does in Scrabble, is becoming hard to access. This does a great job at reopening that. Oak takes the front S for Soak, which he has, so he might often be able to get a bingo on the 2 row, especially if I'm not able to effectively block that area without giving back some other counterplay. And here I make what I believe is my first clear mistake of the game. I struggled to generate a good option on this play, and I really considered playing something with Hoke like L high to take out the line that Nigel just created. The problem with this play is it gives Nigel a new, potentially even more lucrative line on the top row hitting the triple if he's able to hit a bingo starting with any tile that goes before I to make a 2-letter word, which is a significant number of tiles in the bag, so I didn't really like that. Instead, I ended up playing Healy for 19 points under the S of Ceramans to keep a stronger leave and leave that spot open. I think what I should have done here is Nihil for 31 points with Hoke. I unfortunately did not see this word, and it's a word I've historically had a hard time seeing. The H in the middle of the word like that surrounded by vowels is just a very uncommon pattern, and for some reason I think my brain just doesn't generate it as an option as easily as it does a word like Healy. So this is what I should have done, guys. It is still a little bit risky in that it opens the top triple to Nigel, but it is 12 more points than Healy, which is simply too much to give up. So this would have been a better play. Healy, a little bit too cautious, a bit of an inaccuracy on my part, and I did get punished for it as it gave Nigel a nice spot for his Q with Quins for 66. Yes, he does have to burn the blank, but it's easily worth it. he's not going to be playing something like QI for 11 here. You don't give up 55 points just to hold a blank. Queen's absolutely the right call on his part. I draw well after Healy. I pull the Z, which gives me a whole bunch of high-scoring plays. I go with Zori for 50 next to the Q that Nigel just opened. This looks correct. Could also play Zine for 51, which I considered, but COR is a little bit weaker than CEN, so I decided I would do this and try to get a potentially game-ending bingo on my next turn, or in the near future. Another option I did briefly consider was Cuz for 44. This is super nice defensively, really shutting down the top and left areas of the board once again. But I ultimately decided the extra points of Zori, as well as taking out the line next to the Q in case Nigel could hit something there, was still worth it, and I think this is a reasonable call on my part. Nigel has the 7-letter word Gallets, but it doesn't play. Instead, he eventually finds his only playable bingo, the 8-letter Tolages, through the O of Oak. It turns out, in this particular case, playing Cuz instead of Zori would have worked out a bit better for me, as it would have blocked Nigel's bingo. But it's important in Scrabble, guys, when you notice something like that, to not get hung up over it. Because just because it would have worked out better in this case doesn't mean it is the better play in principle, since of course I can't know what Nigel actually had, and it just so happens that he had one of the racks that bingoes only in that part of the board. A computer simulation does still narrowly prefer Zori, so I think it was a reasonable decision that just didn't work out for me in this case. But I'm still in good shape here, it's still my turn, and I continue to have a small lead. And here I ended up playing Vice for 32 above Nigel's last play. I didn't love making this opening of the top triple once again, but I really don't have a whole lot of other plays. Voice to the same spot feels even riskier, now giving Nigel a V to work with in the triple-triple line. There's a lot of O's, E's, and R's left, so I was definitely worried about an overplay through that V, which could be absolutely devastating. One option I didn't consider that maybe I should have is Novice for 32 above the E and the S of Tolages. This actually isn't as risky as it looks. Nigel cannot play above the last tiles of Novice and get to that triple because there are no 2-letter words with a C. However, there is still a bit of a risk in terms of opening the top row, as he can put an A or an O, of which there are many unseen, above NE and make a big play or maybe even a bingo over there. I think Vice is reasonable in this case. Novice might be better early in the game if there are blanks and S's to reach for, but there really isn't a whole lot in the bag I urgently want. There's one S left, there's no blanks, there aren't a whole lot of good scoring tiles. There is a J, but that might be more unwieldy than helpful at this point in the game. So turnover is not actually as important here as it might be in some other situations. So given that, I'm fine with Vice. Keeping the N and the O goes pretty well with my G, especially the N. So I think this is a reasonable call. Thankfully for me, Nigel can't really use the opening I just created, and he does actually have the J. He plays Jog for 33, which seems as good as anything. The leave of EEHIN isn't all that strong, but I wouldn't play something like Nye and keep EEJO. That feels even worse to me, so I think this is pretty solid for Nigel. He's still well within reach here. He's only going to be down about 5 or so points and a turn, and if he can get a decent draw, or if I have a bad draw, he's going to be right back in this game. I thankfully do get a good draw, and the Y is a tile I've been hoping to see for quite a while. Why? Well, back when Nigel played Quins, I noted that it actually takes a sneaky Y hook for Quincy, and that is a potentially lucrative scoring spot. And here I play Y for 44 points, which looks like clearly my best play. One thing I always like to tell my students, guys, is when you notice a hook like that that's not obvious or trivial, write it down somewhere on your score sheet. And what I had done is I put a big Y next to the entry I had for Quins on my score sheet just to make sure I wouldn't forget about it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen even good players make mistakes where they notice a hook and then like 3 or 5 turns later, they get that hook and they've forgotten about it because the board has developed, other threats have been created, and they've forgotten to look back in that spot they were paying attention to several turns earlier. I've even seen games lost because of that. Someone misses a hook and thus doesn't see a spot to play a big play or even a bingo in some cases. So really make sure when you see a cool hook, you write it down or do something to make sure you're not going to forget about it, because once you've gone through the trouble to see it, it would really be a shame to lose a game or a lot of opportunity on forgetting the hook later in the game. But thankfully for me, I did not forget the hook. Y for 44, clearly my best play, and I jumped back into commanding position up 50 points. Nigel has a fairly promising rack here, DEEHINP, but there are no playable bingos, and he goes into a think for quite a while at this point, which makes a lot of sense. It's a pretty pivotal juncture of the game. After my last play, he's starting to feel once again that he probably is going to need to bingo to win this game, and he's really got to think about where is his bingo going and how can he ensure that he's going to have space to fit it on his next turn. It is also worth briefly mentioning, guys, that around this point in the game, there were some major distractions going on in the playing room. If any of you guys were watching the live stream around this point, you may recall noticing both of us, especially me, with kind of incredulous looks on our faces and throwing our arms up, trying to understand what was going on. It turns out that the finals of the Collins Lexicon were going on at the same time, and they had just concluded at this point in the game with a winner being decided. And the organizers of the Collins stream decided that as soon as that game ended, that they were going to interview the champion live on stream. And they did that right next to us while we were still in the heat of this game, and Nigel in particular was getting very low on time. And the interview was pretty noisy, very clearly audible for us, and lasted at least 5 minutes. So it was definitely distracting and quite a bit frustrating, and I certainly was not too happy with the organizers of the other stream for doing that. But in any case, that's what happened, and it wasn't stopping, so we had to do our best to just dial in and ignore it. But I felt particularly bad for Nigel because he really went into the tank on this important move, and he ended up finishing this turn with, I think, just about 4 minutes left on his clock. And I do feel like if that distraction wasn't there, he might have been able to make this play more quickly. Would have affected what happened throughout the rest of the game? Probably not, but still, it was a very unfortunate situation, and hopefully we can all be a little bit more mindful going forward, especially in these high-stakes games when players are low on time, of leaving the playing environment free of noise and distraction. But in any case, Nigel here ended up playing Hep for 21 points, keeping the very nice DEIN leave. I think this is a really smart play on his part because it creates another sneaky line for him to play sevens under the tiles he just played. He's got the E for she, as well as tiles that go under the E and P to form 2-letter words, and if he can draw a 7-letter word, it might often play in that spot. An option he has that gets rid of the same tiles for 3 more points is Hope, but I think this is a lot worse positionally because it doesn't create any new openings, and it also blocks the line for sevens he already has below the E and the S of Tollages. So I think Hep at this point in the game is a smart play on his part, recognizing that his best path to victory is probably to bingo. After his play of Hep, I have AEEGNOR, which is a fairly promising looking rack that feels like it should make a lot of bingos, but unfortunately for me, it does not. And I pretty quickly realized that I'm going to want to play under the play Nigel just made of Hep, and the first thing I consider is Genoa for 26 points, keeping ER, which is a very solid play. I end up deciding, though, to go with Onager for 2 more points. It looks a little bit strange because it gives back a lot more scoring spots. It gives back the R and the triple, and it also allows SHO, perhaps, to be hooked with a W or a D or something that's going to score a decent amount with an overlap. But what I decided here was I actually want that, because I figured at this point, whatever I play, I'm going up close to 60 points, and I can withstand a 30 or 40 point scoring play. And the main risk I have at this point is Nigel bingoing, most likely to the E of Eam at the bottom of the board. So I actually wanted to create these scoring spots on purpose to try to offset the bingo threat, figuring if Nigel scores 30 or 40, that's fine, I can block the E and hold on to my 40-point lead and likely coast to a victory on a dead board. And on the flip side, if Nigel bingos, then I'll hopefully be able to draw a decent scoring tile and score 30 or 40 points myself to outrun him. So that was kind of my logic here, and it's just a general principle, guys, in Scrabble, that when you're up enough that you feel like the only way you can lose is an opponent bingo, if you can't block all of the bingo threats, a great strategy is often to create scoring spots to counterbalance those threats. You see it a lot towards the end of the game, especially when someone will deliberately set up like a huge J or Z spot when they have that tile, so that if their opponent bingos, they can just return with a 60-point J or Z play and hold on to the win. This is a little bit less of an extreme example of that and not quite as late in the game, but it's sort of the same idea, and I was really happy with this play. I also liked getting rid of an extra tile here just to accelerate the end of the game a little bit, and also give me some better chances to draw the final remaining S or some of the much-needed scoring tiles from the bag. Nigel does draw some scoring tiles, and he is able to capitalize on the spot I just created with Whiny for 38 points. I was a little bit taken aback by how many points he scored with this, as it does bring him to within 19 on the scoreboard, but I still felt, okay, even if he scored almost 40 there, I'd be able to shut down the bottom and hold on to my lead. However, there was no shutting down to be done here as I had a bingo of my own, and I was able to get this down very quickly, the 9-letter Trabiated through the TE for 78 points. As happy as I was to get this down, I knew the game wasn't over yet because I am opening a triple-triple with that T, and if Nigel is able to get a triple-triple down through that T, he will almost certainly win the game. That being said, I'm not up that much anymore. That's certainly a risk I need to take. And thankfully for me, Nigel did not have a triple-triple. He's actually not that far off from something like defected or defatted, but he doesn't have it. And here, Nigel decided to challenge Trabeated, as while he thought it was a word, he wasn't 100% sure. That makes a lot of sense because, as I've said so many times, guys, in this week's videos, spread does not matter in these games. If Nigel is going to lose, he doesn't care whether he loses by 60 or 160. So if he has any doubt about whether this is a word, it makes sense for him to challenge, because if he leaves this on the board, he really doesn't have a path to victory here. He can score pretty well with something like Coder for 38, but that's just not going to cut it. After this play, I play something through the T. I maintain a 70 or 80 point lead. Even if at that point Nigel hits something through the E and Eam, it's not going to hit the triple word on the bottom left, as I'll have blocked that. It's not going to score enough, and I'm going to go on to win pretty easily. The pool is balanced enough that Nigel can't really hope I have such a horrible rack that I can't address the T. So there's really no legitimate path to victory for him here if it stays on the board. So he made, again, I think, a prudent decision to challenge given the circumstances that he wasn't 100% sure this was valid. After that, the rest of the game was fairly academic. I play outro just to take out any freak threats through the T or E at the bottom. Nigel ends up now playing Coder for 38, and we go into the endgame. Both of us play an optimal endgame here. I play Gain for 20, saving multiple spots to go out with ATU. Nigel plays Fads for 27, and I go out with Utah for 20 points, making 2 and 8 as planned. And then I get 8 bonus points from Nigel's unplayed DRT, and I end up with a victory 463 to 365. So another hard-fought game and a big win for me, forcing, once again, a decisive Game 5, which is going to decide the champion once and for all. I felt pretty good about how I played this game. Nihil over Hilly would definitely have been better. That was probably my most clear mistake. There were a couple other questionable turns, but overall, I'm pretty happy with how I played, and especially with my find of Trabeated, which more or less locked up this must-win game. So yeah, that's it for this one, guys. Thanks so much for watching as always. Really appreciate your support. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for the recap of the decisive Game 5. Don't miss that one. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.